next we're going to make a checkpoint, and the whole purpose of this is when we create our kill volumes, we want to be able to remember a position in space to return the player to once they hit the kill volume. So you could think of this as a respawn point as well, if you want to think about it that way. So first off, some of this is going to be a review, but I'm going to make a new shape. It's going to be a trigger. I'm going to make this 2, 2, 2. Tab will switch your fields there. I'm going to move this to a corner, like so, and I'm going to give it a material. So I'll call this m_checkpoint. Make sure you drag and drop this on the object and give it a color. I'm going to make this a cyan. So here's another fun thing. On your materials, it'll default to opaque. But if you change this to transparent, you'll see that if I click back on my albedo color right here on the material, if you change your alpha channel, you can make it semi-transparent. So maybe that looks a little bit closer to what we want. So I'm going to save this. Go to your capsule, make sure you rename this checkpoint, and make it make the collider a trigger. We do want to be able to pass through this. Okay, it's trigger. All right, so if we hit play, we should be able to go straight through here. Cool. And so when the player enters this trigger, we want to save the position of this checkpoint and store it so that when the player needs to say respawn, we just look back at the last stored position and put the player there. In this case, I do think that it would be appropriate to put the player position on the player controller. If we wanted to break this out, we could make a player spawn script or something, but we'll just keep things simple for now. So we're actually going to store this value inside the player controller. So firstly, at the very top, I'm going to create a new field. We can make another serialized field. Remember, this is going to be private, meaning other scripts cannot directly change this value or access it. And the position, remember the XYZ values, we call that a vector 3. Well, if I click on my capsule, my checkpoint right here, the position is also an XYZ. So this is going to be a vector 3. And when we store it, we're storing these 3 values right here. And when we assign them to the player, we're saying take these 3 values and put them here. So these 3 values. So then the player will then perfectly match the position over here once we put those values in. Okay, so that's the concept. All you have to do is make it a vector 3. Let's call this respawn point. All right. So now let's make our checkpoint script. We want to do the same. Ooh, error. You know, sometimes this will happen with Unity. That particular one, the callback error is just random. It will happen. Worst case, just open it back up. Here we go. Close it out. Make sure you go back to your scene. Make sure you've been saving very often. I think I have been. Let's double check. Okay, Control S will save, so just in case. Make sure you do that. All right, go to your scripts. I'm going to make a new script called checkpoint. And just like before, this script, when we pass into the trigger, we want the player, we want to detect if it's the player, right? It could be an enemy. We don't want an enemy entering the trigger and resetting a respawn point. But if the player enters the trigger, store the position of this checkpoint so that whenever we put in our kill volumes, we return to the last respawn. So don't forget to apply your checkpoint script to your checkpoint. Save. Open up your checkpoint script. We'll get rid of this. Okay, so review. Just like before, we have our on trigger enter. And then we want to test to make sure this is the player, right? By comparing the tag, because we did tag the player as player. Now, what do we want to do? Now, up to now, I've been trying to get this rigid body component from the player. What I want to do in this case is I want access to, let's say, the respawn point, or I want to call a function. But I want access to this particular script. In the same way in which we searched for the rigid body component, we can search for the player controller component. A script and a component are they're the same things. Like a component is a component. As we're searching for this type of thing. So all this would do, let's actually type this out in pseudocode first. First we want to find the player controller script. Then we want to get this checkpoint's position. Then we want to send the checkpoint position to the player script. All right, so to find the player script, just like before, just like we did with the rigid body, we're going to do other dot game object dot get component. And what type of component are we looking for? Player controller. Don't forget to add the 2 parentheses here. It's a function, it's a search function. And this will return an object of this type if it finds it. So let's actually store this somewhere as well. We're creating a new variable of type player controller. I'll just call this what it is. Player controller, lowercase, in this case, just to differentiate. So we're creating a new variable of type player controller called player controller and storing the results of our search function when we're looking for the player controller. And when we find that, we put that into there. Now don't forget, we also need to check to make sure that if we found something, or if only do the next step if we found something. So if it's not empty or null, then we want to get this checkpoint's position and send the checkpoint position to the player script. So to get this checkpoint's position, for readability, I'm just going to make a new vector 3. Remember, a position is an x, y, z, so it's going to be a vector 3. We can call this whatever we want. We'll call this new spawn point is equal to. Now, how do we get the position of our checkpoint? We'll consider where we are right now. Right now, we're in a script called checkpoint that exists on the checkpoint. If we're right here, we can access the game object and access the transform on the game object. Now, the transform is the only component that we don't have to do a search for. Up to now, we've had to do a search to find any of these particular components. But every single game object has a transform component. You'll see if I make a brand new game object, it comes already built in with a transform component. So we actually don't have to search for that. That's the one exception to the rule. So from our script, if we can get the transform component on the same game object we're on, then we can access the position inside of here. So this is what we want, and this is what we want to send to the player. So we're right here. All we have to do is say game object, whatever game object we're attached to, then transform, then dot position. I'm gonna go back to my script. Is equal to, if I just say transform, that's shorthand for saying game object dot transform. It's really the same thing. It's assumed. So just remember, you can always access a transform very directly and easily. Transform dot position. So this is our new vector 3. It's just our transform dot position. These 3 values up here. Now, I need to take this and assign it on my player controller script. I need to assign it into here. So the question is, how do we do that? We want to send the checkpoint position to the player script. Well, we have access to the player script. We know that it's not empty. So what I technically want to do is I want to say player controller dot, let's actually send this into a function to change it. So I'm going to call this set new respawn, just like that. And I'm going to go over to my player controller script and go down to the bottom. And I'm going to add a new function of the same name, set player respawn. So here's the trick. Even though this looks like it's going to work, it still doesn't recognize it. Now, the reason it does not recognize it is because right now this is a private function. If you add the keyword public, this means that other scripts, once they have a reference, anything that has a reference to this script can now call this function. So back on checkpoint, right here, we're accessing this script right here. And set new respawn. Oh, right. We didn't call that the same thing. So I'm going to double click this, control paste. So set new respawn. So from our checkpoint, we can call a function on our player controller, which is a pretty cool way of having two scripts talk to each other. However, we're not done. We want to send this new spawn point, this vector3, I want to send this new spawn point out of here into the player controller and assign it up here. So in order to do that, I need to define what type of object this function can receive. So if I want to send something to this script, and I want it to be of type vector3, I'll call this new respawn point. Right, so now this can receive a new respawn point, which means that back here, see how now I have this arrowed out? I can take this new spawn point and send it into this function that I just created. So this will run the function on our player controller up here and send it this new spawn point that we just created. So I'm taking this, I'm sending it right on through to the player controller. So we're receiving it and storing it into this. And the final step is just to come up here, whatever this is called, respawn point. I'm going to reassign this. So respawn point is equal to this one that we just received, new respawn point. So I know that might be a little bit complicated for now, but ultimately I wanted to show you how to expose a function, how to send a value through a function. This could be a float, this could be a Boolean, this could be a player controller script. It could be whatever you want. As long as you're defining what to receive, you can receive it and then do something with it. In this case, I'm just taking this thing at the top that we made and storing this into it. So let's save that. And we can check to see if this worked. Let me close this. We can check to see if this worked just by going to our player. I'm going to select that while I'm playing. You see my XYZ. If this worked, when I touch the checkpoint, it should send the values straight into my player controller and store it as the respawn point, which is cool. So now if we decide to respawn the player, we can just say, okay, where do I respawn? Look at the last respawn point and move it here. And then we should be able to it should pop us back to our checkpoint. So that's pretty cool. Next, I'm going to show you how to put together the kill volume so that we can actually use this respawn point.